There are three key things to make you a better podcaster. Let's talk about it. What's up, pod influencers? My name is Ozil, and I want to welcome you to the Podcast Influence YouTube channel, where I help you amplify your influence with podcasting. And on this channel, I'm going to share with you tips, insights, and some personal strategies that I use with my podcast to help you pro up your podcasting with style and, of course, building influence. All right, so if this is your first time, welcome to Podcast Influence. We've been getting a good, nice sizable traffic here to Podcast Influence. It's been organically growing slowly, but we're in it for the long haul. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and that also applies to your podcast journey. So if this is your first time, welcome. Thank you so much for subbing. And of course, if you are returning once again, you know I got mad love for you. All right, so today we're going to be talking about three key things to make you a better podcaster. So as podcasters, we get caught up in this hamster wheel of thinking that the more downloads we get, the better our podcast will be. We determine our podcast success by looking at the download numbers, right? And looking at the listenership and seeking external validation to validate the worth of our podcast. And it's a huge mistake that I see a lot of podcasters make. They're looking for the next marketing tool, or how can I grow my podcast? And these are all valid reasons, right? To look at your podcast internally and be like, look, we want to grow our podcast, right? You want to grow your podcast. So I'm not negating the reason for you to really want to grow your podcast. However, I will say that there are three key things that a lot of people miss in regards to just being a better podcast. Instead of looking for the secret bullet out there, or the secret sauce, whatever you want to call it, to make your podcast grow, how about if we look internally and ask ourselves some questions before we determine whether or not our podcast has wings to take it to the next level? So let's break it down right now. So here is tip number one to make your podcast better and to gain more listenership. Number one is do an audio audit. Take a listen to your audio quality. Listen to it from a listener's perspective and really determine whether or not you are delivering the best audio quality experience to your listener. I think it's something that a lot of podcasters, they just skip over and think that, well, I got this cheap microphone, or a lot of podcasters don't have a microphone at all, unfortunately. And, they just feel like they could just go ahead and wing it. And you have to listen to it and be like, if I was a listener, if I stumbled upon this podcast, am I enjoying the audio experience? Remember, this is an audio platform. So we as podcasters need to make sure that we ensure the most optimal, like the best audio quality we can deliver. So listening to your audio, and I know now with there's virtual and Zoom calls, and sometimes we sacrifice the audio quality, and that's okay. But for the most part, you can listen to it. Sometimes I listen to podcasts for the first time, and you hear like a lot of hissing sound. There's a lot of static. It sounds like a lot of these podcast hosts are doing a podcast from their bathroom. It just sounds really echoey. It's horrible. So really take a deep dive into your audio quality and think about, from a listener's perspective, is this a great audio experience? Because people will unplug and unsubscribe from your podcast if you don't deliver a good audio quality experience. So audio edit. And if you need some recommendations, by the way, I'll make sure that I'll link it up as some of my top podcasting mic recommendations, but there's no excuse, my friend. You have to deliver a great audio experience. So audio edit, that is one thing that you can do to make your podcast better. Tip number two, the value that you are delivering to your listener. Are you entertaining them? Are you informing them? Are you educating them? This is very, very important in gaining new listenership. Why? Because a lot of podcast hosts that I've heard recently, they just ramble, like they have no context. And if you really want to gain listenership, you have to be intentional. I believe in having curated content that has context that can really expand on a conversation and really include the listener into the conversation. Okay, so you have to think about, what can I do to be super clear and to have context within my podcast episodes? Because if I do add context, you can really craft some great topics that will attract new listeners. And again, a lot of podcast hosts, they just ramble. They want to talk about themselves. And I mean, look, I'm going to be real with you because this podcast is about being real. I'm not going to fluff it up like everybody else. Let me be real honest with you. It's not about you. It's not about you. I know you're the podcast host, but if you ramble on and you're sharing, and of course we want to hear your experience, but if you don't bring context and deliver something of value, whether it's education, value of entertainment, something that the listener can take away from the podcast, then you're really fighting an uphill battle to build and attract a new audience. So if you want to make your podcast better, think about context, okay? Curated content that has context that the listener can take away from. That is tip number 2. Tip number 3, skills. Skills pays the bills. So you want to make sure that you look at yourself and say, where can I improve in? If you are an interview-based podcast host, think about ways where you can improve your interviewing chops. As I mentioned before, a lot of people coming into the podcast world never went through formal training, right? We're not broadcasters, we're podcasters. So we're simply turning on the mic and just kind of sharing and bringing on people, interviewing. So there's really no formal training, but we have to understand that in order to attract new listeners still are kind of conditioned to, they know what a good interview sounds like. They know when there's great, valuable contextual content that's delivered and is tailored for them. So we have to kind of take that away from the pros and say, how can we implement that into a podcast? Sure, a podcast is supposed to be raw and uncut. It's different and it's you, but you got to be able to think about, what can I do to become a better interviewer? Okay, a lot of the times, went back to tip 2, right? Podcast hosts, they just ramble and they don't even focus on the interview. Next thing you know, they're focusing on themselves and not even the guest. So think about what can you do to improve your interviewing chops? And if you are a solo caster, if you do solo shows, what can you do to be concise, clear, and bright? Okay, and that's what people want. Short, brief, to the point. Let's get in, let's get out, and figure out ways. Again, this is a very communicative skill that we're developing. So you got to think about, what can I do to really enhance my communication skills and become a better podcast host, which will result into gaining new listenership. So that is tip number 3 on being a better podcast host and having a better podcast. All right, guys, that is it. Hopefully you enjoyed these 3 tips to make your podcast better. Remember, it's not about the latest marketing tool or having the bells and whistles on your website or being everywhere. At the end of the day, real talk here, you can go to all these YouTube channels and they can give you all these tips and strategies, but you got to look internally sometimes and really look at, what can we do from an internal standpoint and how can I become a better podcast host? And those are 3 things that if you implement, that you're mindful of, and you really exercise and practice, you will become a better podcaster, and it will make for a better podcast, and it will attract new listenership. So stop seeking for external validation. Stop looking for the secret bullet. Sometimes you got to look within yourself and look within your podcast and deliver it outward. And trust me, when you deliver the goods, people will come, okay? And then later on, of course, we could talk about marketing, etc. But you got to look internally, okay? And I felt really compelled to shoot this video because most podcasters, sometimes they come from it from a egotistical standpoint rather than how can I become a better teacher? How can I serve my community? Okay, so that's something that you want to look forward to and embrace. Okay, so hopefully that brought you a ton of value. Let me know in the comments section below. In the question of the day, let me know which one of these 3 tips will you implement today. Okay, what is the first one that you got to focus on? Leave it in the comments section below. And listen, I respond to all of the comments. I love hearing from you, so we'll love your feedback. And I'm going to continue showing up here every Thursday. I have a brand new video. So thank you so much. And of course, tell a friend about this Podcast Influence YouTube channel. As a podcaster jumping into YouTube, this is a whole new experience for me. So there's a lot of things that I got to level up on. But for me, it's all about bringing in contextual content that's going to help you on your podcast journey. So hopefully that helps you out. Thanks again. Please hit subscribe, hit the notification button to be first in line for all the latest content. My name is Ozil. Till next time, peace and one love.